One thing that should be pretty obvious by now is that among the things that were killed by the internet is the internet itself. The latest developments in the way that people are practicing the internet are very different from the way people who originally thought of the internet have been envisaging it. The idea that you could have access to everything and everyone at all times seems increasingly to be a bad idea. And the result of that is that more and more people are going towards a route on the internet that is not as interconnected as you might think of, as you might idealize it, but more like a series of connections that are more or less monitored and self-controlled by the people who use them. This post message here from from a message board by the platform District 0x points out that the good and evil are subjective, governing the internet killed the internet. Let's not repeat history. Now, of course, this is a matter of the internet being connected with the larger powers of governments and likely, probably, the larger powers of world governments as a whole. And more specifically, the possibility that if you have access to anyone, then anyone else has access to anyone, which makes the issues of privacy, anonymity, and kind of minding your own business a matter of public record rather than a thing that you can enjoy as an individual person. And certainly a lot of that is due to the internet existing itself and to the very quick expansion of having access to new services all the time and having the new hardware to do this at a higher range. And probably the most obvious example of that came out in the Snowden revelations in 2013, where the leak of data by the National Security Agency pointed out that essentially the US government was able to check on every bit of information that exists on the internet at a very large range. Most of that being using somewhat public data, and some of it being also using specific tools designed by the NSA for that purpose. And some of that is also allowed by the framework, the regulatory framework that was established in the United States following the September 11 attacks. But it is very much just a product that was built around the quick availability of a bunch of new methods that were not necessarily controlled in any kind of real way. The Patriot Act and essentially what happened after September 11th became just the legalized, massive, serious application of these methods, which could have been already available otherwise for very specific reasons. The Snowden files were published in The Guardian and in The Washington Post, originally by an anonymous source, but it was revealed very quickly that Snowden was an NSA contractor. And as a result of that, he had firsthand knowledge of the documents that he was sharing. And of course, part of the controversy came mostly from the fact that he, as a contractor, was supposed to keep these documents quiet. And the result of that is that he became listed as a wanted person by the US government for sharing data that was private and secret to the US government. And the most recent development of that being that he has accepted citizenship from the Russian government. The direct reaction to that, or the direct consequence of that, was that President Obama, who was president at the time, uh, um, did started a very large scale review of the laws that were existing at the time, which were so vast and so far reaching that few people had actually realized how far they could go. And the subsequent new laws and new regulations that were addressed as a result of that were also pretty massive, but they still allow in very many ways the same practices that existed before, mostly with a proper justification, and also because the amount of data that is public on the internet still remains pretty wide, and therefore using that same combination of means from From very specific knowledge created by the NSA and public data, there is still a lot of room for governments around the world to track individuals. The counterpart to that is that people have been more increasingly using side roads on the internet to be able to connect with one another while at the same time a little bit out of prying eyes, especially of governments. And District Zero X in what is one of the examples of this. It's a network of decentralized marketplaces and communities powered by Ethereum. We have mentioned Ethereum as a cryptocurrency uh, um, previously. And of course, the aspect of transferring money outside of the eyes of governments is that's definitely part of the equation here. But just being able to purchase things that are not necessarily looked at by the government is also a very appealing method for a lot of people. District Zero X also works on Aragon, which is a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, which is one of the formats that is increasingly um, attached to cryptocurrencies. It is essentially a structure and a structure that is led by the people who are organizing it. So it is mostly a form of government, if you will, that is just not in the charge of one person, but the different people who are part of it take the votes in it. And that in and of itself is not new or unique to the internet. This paper from 1964 described the various ways in which you could organize a communication network. Could be centralized, and that is the easiest and fastest way to make things happen. That is how the internet became what it is, but it could also be decentralized or distributed. And those three different types of networks work equally as well. They fulfill the same functions. They are just built according to different architectures, if you will. So the result of that is that depending on how people are considering their networks, depending on how people figure their networks, there is the possibility of doing a thing that we are now calling the internet using a decentralized system rather than having a central server where everything has to go through. Now we could pass data from one node to another, from one server to another, just hopping along a network in which a bunch of people would be able to connect with one another by speaking the same computer language without having necessarily a one point of entry or one point of exit. And this became very quickly part of the vocabulary for a lot of people on the internet, at least people who are not necessarily interested in the money-making aspect of it. This social media platform described here, called Diaspora, um, was a social network launched in 2010, kind of as a Kickstarter project, which gathered enormous amounts of money very quickly and kind of exceeded its goal, including some funding from a certain Mark Zuckerberg, who thought that it was a cool idea. Diaspora is a very anthropological term used to describe mass dispersal of people away from their homeland, usually associated with Greek history, Jewish history, Armenian history, but kind of becoming a lot of African history as well, African slave trade, kind of becoming a much larger concept in the modern world when the idea of a homeland now is becoming a much different issue than it used to be not so long ago. And so diaspora as a social network doesn't quite exist anymore, although it still has its process, as we're going to see in a second. But you can see that same little diagram here, kind of these branching out systems, kind of like it appeared on the previous slide. And one of the selling points of diaspora is that you own your data. Connecting socially is human nature. You shouldn't have to trade away your personal information to participate. And so diaspora has kind of morphed into something a little bit different. It is still a piece of software, which is now essentially a personal web server with social networking capabilities. So people in wherever they are can run their own social media based on their own computer/server. Server technology is now a lot more available, a lot cheaper, and in fact, I have several of them running in my house right now, allowing people to have access to various services not owned or really belonging to anyone in particular but you. So the format of Diaspora today, based on these three key philosophies: the decentralization, instead of everyone's data being held on huge central servers owned by large organizations, Diaspora exists on independently uh, uh, owned servers, run servers or pods all over the world. You choose which pod to register with. You can then connect seamlessly with the diaspora community worldwide. Principle of freedom: you can be whoever you want to be in diaspora. Unlike some networks, you don't have to use your real identity. This is an obvious dig at Facebook, which has been cracking down on people using pseudonyms, and diaspora started with allowing pseudonyms in as soon as 2010. You can interact with people in whatever way you choose. The only limit is your imagination. Diaspora is also free software, giving you liberty over how you choose it. In diaspora, you own your data. You don't sign over rights to a corporation or other interests who could use it. In addition, you choose who sees what you share using aspects. With diaspora, your friends, your habits, your contents, it's your business, not ours. So different people with different servers are operating different copies of the diaspora software, and as a result of that, anyone on the internet can connect with these servers the same way you connect to your other social media platforms. Is just as owned in different places. So this idea has become a lot more popular, and especially in the last few weeks or months, I guess, when people became tired of Twitter, and a lot of them moved to Mastodon. Mastodon is a social media platform also based on this system of various servers or pods. In this case, the different servers are more or less connected with one another, which has caused a little bit of frustration for Twitter users and people who are otherwise used to the internet connecting seamlessly a little bit around the world. Since the growth of Mastodon happened very quickly overnight in the past couple of weeks or a few weeks, whatever it was, and the system itself has been struggling a little bit, but Mastodon as a platform has existed since 2016, 2017, and people have been using it without any issues all this time. This is just a matter of people growing in and out of it. The thing is that just like diaspora, very early, there were also attempts to use these social media platforms to avoid censorship in other places. Diaspora was more or less notoriously used by ISIS cells for a little while, but because the majority of users have some control over the servers, they quickly banned the activity tied to ISIS and banned specific words, which allowed for the control of the data there. Mastodon was also used very early on by a bunch of right-wing groups, which were also banned very quickly. The best part about the way that these systems work is that different laws that apply in different countries can be applied seamlessly to the way the servers are hosted. So if you have a Mastodon server in France or in Germany where using Nazi imagery is illegal, then you can report that to the authorities and very quickly get the people arrested for posted things that are otherwise illegal on the internet. So the idea is that the people who are using the server are in charge of it, and the people who are using the service are in charge of it, as opposed to a kind of abstract service like Twitter or Facebook, where the goal is to make quote unquote everyone happy, and you don't necessarily know who is in charge of what and how the definitions are being applied across the board. So a lot of these services can be put together into a system that is called these days the Fediverse, with a bunch of different services that are able to speak with one another by sharing the same kind of computer language. Many of those some pieces of software in the Fediverse are social media, but a lot of this is also fulfilling very important features for other parts of the internet. Nextcloud is a cloud-based system, kind of like your Google Cloud, except it is owned by private servers. PeerTube is the YouTube alternative. Drupal is a website or content management system. Um, the logo on the left there is Bookworm, which is a reading social media website. So for an alternative for trying to think of the name and I'm losing it now. The one that is owned by Amazon, you get the idea. Um, and the logo in the center is PixelFed, which is an image hosting platform. Anyway, those different systems are working with one another. You can also extend that to other platforms that are more or less popular outside of that, such as Tumblr and WordPress. So essentially, you could use everything that the internet currently works on using federated services the way that they exist today. And this is something that is becoming increasingly available to literally everyone. Although there are some drawbacks, this is from Unohost, which provides some services and kind of advises people regarding self-hosting, essentially running your own server with your own copy of such services as Diaspora or Nextcloud or whatever it is. And because all of this is being owned by you, there are some little drawbacks because you will have to take care of your own service the way that a major corporation takes care of its own service at all times and has dedicated teams to do that. In that case, you kind of have to do part of the job of taking care of this. So hosting yourself is a bit like growing your own garden of vegetables. It requires work and patience. While Unohost aims to do all that hard work for you, self-hosting still requires that you take time to learn and configure a few things about your server properly. You will also need to perform maintenance tasks such as upgrades from time to time, ask for support if some things break. Operating a server means that you are responsible for the data you are hosting. Nobody will be able to recover them from you if you get lost. Unohost provides backup features, which you use regularly to back up the configuration and data you care about. Unohost and most applications packaged for it are free and open source, developing the communities of people in their free time in the base of the best effort. There is no absolute guarantee that software will work in every possible circumstance. The performance of your self-hosted server is also related to its CPU and RAM and to the available internet connectivity. Yes, this is not the ideal. This is not the utopic form of internet that people tend to think of, but there is somewhat of a price to pay for having access to a little bit more privacy and to following rules that most other people tend to follow. So the idea of self-hosting is currently growing as we are discovering more and more the price that we are paying for other services, such as having your own cloud services through iCloud and Google, or having your images on Amazon that can be looked at by robots that will be analyzing it to figure out what you are trying to purchase, etc. So this is kind of the latest development in this world that is certainly changing the way that people are using the internet.